All right, on the new case, I wanted to test fit the shafts in there to see how they fit, and you can see it. I'm hitting a small little burr on the inside down there, left over from the machining on both of these. So I'm gonna have to clean that up and then clean the case out really well. I don't want any little chips in there. So, okay, I deburred right there and there, so the shafts go in nice now. I can't quite drive it in all the way because it is like a press fit on this end, so I'm not going to attempt to do that. So the shift rail, you see that? The reverse one was nice and free. The 1-2 is a little sticky, and same with the 3-4. So I'm concerned that might hang up. So I'm gonna take that out, polish it. I don't want to do anything to the bore, but if I have to, then I have to. All right, when I got everything apart, I noticed all of my parts looked in great shape. I polished up the shift rails, they look nice. I polished up these, I don't know what they're called, Countershaft shafts or something. I noticed two big problems. First, with this countershaft, when I took it out, it had needle bearings in there, of course, and a thrust washer that goes on the end. It's right here. These are just like they're like plastic, so obviously. But it did not have the retaining washer. Where are we? Didn't have the retaining washer on the end of the bearings. You can see here. This is for the reverse gear, but it's the needle bearings go in there, and then it's got a washer that goes on the outside so that the needle bearings themselves don't rub against the thrust washer. Well, it was not in there. Now, thinking about how you put that in, I can see it's going to be pretty hard to get it back in because it's got to stay stuck on there with grease while you drop this in and then get a shaft through it. So maybe they left it off on purpose, I don't know. But anyway, you can't just buy those two thrust washers for some reason. It's like a pain in the butt. So I figure if I'm going to buy a kit, I'm just going to go ahead and get a whole kit with new blocker rings and new needle bearings and all that. So another thing I noticed, this is the shaft for the countershaft gear. Let me see if I can get some focus for you there. If you look at the bearing surface is right up here. Now I scratched it a little bit when I was using my micrometer, I guess, I don't know, but you can see there's some wear in it. There's like a lip right here. That actually measures 0.02 of an inch when I put my micrometer on there, and it's a big bump. You can feel it easily. So this shaft is worn. So I ordered a new shaft. It's also worn on the other end too. Not quite as bad. That's the end where the reverse gear is. The reverse gear one, it doesn't look bad at all, so I didn't worry about that. So I ordered a new shaft, still waiting for that to come in. I also got new bearings because I noticed when I hammered these out, they get a little clicky in there when you spin it. That's, I probably put little dents in the raceway. But I got the heavy duty set, and you can see it's got a lot more ball bearings in it than the stock ones do. So, and I also have all new lock rings. Here's the two little retaining washers for the bearings that I needed. And there's the two for the reverse gear. So you have two sets in different sizes. This has all new thrust bearings in it. They're just plastic. New clips, all that. So I'm just going to replace all the parts that I got. Why not? I pay for them. Here's all my gears put back on my output shaft. I put on the new blocking rings in there, the new locking clips in there, locking rings, and I'm using this the new thrust bearing that came with it. Not a thrust bearing, just a thrust washer. This one has an oil groove in it, the other one didn't. So I'm packing my reverse gear set here. You can see I put my new needle bearings in there, packed them with grease. Try not to use too much grease because I don't want big globs of the grease clogging up any oil holes or anything. So there's one side. I'm just gonna do the other side. It's easy, just stick your finger in the grease and just dab it on there and they stick to your finger. Then you just drop them in there and wipe them off. I'll put my thrust washer for the reverse gear set in there. I'm reusing the metal ones that I had just because I don't like these little plastic ones. They just look so cheesy, I don't know. So I'm reusing the metal ones. They seem pretty, they seem okay. So let's see, I've got it packed on both sides with the retaining washer. See if I can get it in there without knocking that out while I'm watching through the camera. Okay, now I'm going to squeeze this in there. There we go. And I'll put a little bit of grease on the shaft. I'm not going to put too much on there. And I think I'm not quite lining up with the washer in there. So I'll have to pull that over with a little pry tool right up through there. Nope. There it goes. All right, we're in. I'm going to put the reverse gear lever in there and the shaft. I also have to get that detent in there somehow. Okay, I spent maybe 10 minutes just trying to get that little detent in there with the spring. It's not easy. You can see in through the side here when you're dropping it in, but it just didn't want to go in straight. Also, I figured I'd just try it out, the movement, and that's it. I guess that would be in gear. There's a lot of slop in the, not slop, but there's not enough tension on the detent. So I slide it the other way, same thing. So I don't know if it'll affect it much, but I'm thinking I might try pulling it back out and maybe I can stretch the spring just a little bit. I didn't get replacement springs with my kit, so I'm sure they're kind of squished a little bit, but I'm gonna try. I don't really like how loose that is. I'm pretty sure the gear lever will keep it in place, but this is supposed to be the detent that, you know, keeps it in gear. So if it's got that much slop, I don't think that's very good. So I'm gonna pull it back up. Okay, I got the detent back in right here. I couldn't really stretch the spring, and I didn't think I thought it would kind of ruin it. So what I did was I just took the little detent ball that goes with the reverse gear. So not to lose it. So the kit comes with a new one right there. So it's a little smaller diameter than the spring, so it frees the spring up, you know, just a little bit, 1/8 of an inch or so. So I put that in the hole. I know the detent's up much higher. So I'm gonna put it together, and then it only took me like 2 minutes to get it in this time. I'm getting better at it. So I'm gonna put the shaft together with the reverse lever on there. Okay, got my detent in there. I don't know if you can see it. Put my shift arms this time. This is the second time. Tried it without the shift arms. It doesn't work too well. I mean the shift levers. Here's my shift arm right here. And let's go for it. Just put a coating of grease on there. It's very slippery. It's hard to push it in. Okay, now I gotta get the detent ball pushed down. I put a little ball bearing under the spring, so now not nearly as much play in it. There. So let me put that set screw in there and see if it works good. I'm gonna Loctite this in, but for now I'm just gonna screw it down, make sure that the reverse shift works. So that's reverse. Detent feels pretty good. So I put my front bearing on. To get it on there, I just heated it up with my heat gun for a few minutes until it got up to about 200 degrees. I checked it, and now it's already cooling down. I've got my new roller bearings in my countershaft, and this is the retaining ring that was missing when I took it out. So that's one of the reasons I had to buy a new kit. So it just goes on the outside like that. And I got some grease in there to hold it in. Then I'm going to put my thrust washers in. Got a little notch on there so it just fits in. You can see it better on this side. So it just sits in like that in a little notch. See if it's spinning. And I'll put some grease on there so it sticks on. And then I'm just going to drop my countershaft right in there. I'm not going to put the pin in. I don't have my new one yet, but remember when I took it apart, I had to pull that pin out. That was one of the first things I did, because that countershaft has to move out of the way in order to get the other gears out, because it's so big that it sticks up right around here and you can't get the input shaft out and all that. So I'm just going to drop it in very gently because I don't want those roller bearings to fall out. And I'm actually going to tip the case up on end, just like when I did the reverse, to make it easier to slide in. All right, so I have the countershaft in place without the pin. You can see it's pushed over to the side, and if you look close in there, let's see if I can show it right there. That's the thrust washer right there sticking out. And there's the retaining washer holding those needle bearings in. That's the part that was missing when I took it out. So you can see it's shifted over just a little bit, you know, 1/2 inch or so. And that gives me clearance down here at the bottom to put in that input shaft when I get to that part. So it's just nests right in the corner there. Hopefully I don't lose any needle bearings. The good news is it looks like if one of these needle bearings did fall out, it's going to stay inside that countershaft. It can't fall inside the case until you pull it out. So it would be possible to sneak it back in if one of them did fall out, but I'm just going to be real careful with the case. I don't bang it. And hopefully they'll stick in there with the grease. Okay, I slid the output shaft in with all the gear cluster on there. It's just sitting in there off to the side so that I can work on I gotta get the shift rails in, with the shift arms or fingers or whatever they call it. So I'm gonna work on that. Here's, I do the 3/4 first. It's got the interlock pin in there, so I'll fill that full of grease so it doesn't fall out when I'm putting it in. I've also got the other detent that sits on top of the reverse rail down there. It wasn't easy getting in. So there's one detent underneath of the 3/4 and one detent on top of the 3/4. They go on either side of, there we go. They go on either side of this. So I've already got the bottom one in. Okay, I put the 3/4 shift fork in there. I greased up where the cam is gonna ride on there from the shift arm. And I've got my 3/4 shift rail in there, which is out of focus. And it's also got the detent in there being held in with some grease. Now that has to be rotated 90 degrees to the left, but I'm not gonna rotate it until I get it in. And then also there's the detent inside the bottom hole there. I don't think you can see it, but I've got to push down on that after I feed the rail through the shift arm and into that hole. So, fun. Okay, the 3/4 shift rail's done. Got the fork on the cam. I missed it the first time, I had to take it back out. And I put some Loctite on that set screw down there. I've also got the detent ball on there. You can see it, the detent. I know I said before you got to push that down, but if everything's in neutral, it drops down, so you don't have to worry about that. So, and I've got this sitting on the cam, just ready to put in the 1/2 shift rail, and then I'll put my detents in. I'm done that part. All right, here's my input shaft ready to go. I've got my blocking ring on there, and I put the needle bearings in there, all packed in. These are nice because they're large enough where they can't fall out. You have to, the last one has to slide in from the end, so you don't have to worry about them collapsing in there as much. And that is going to go right around the end of the output shaft right there. So I have the case tilted over a little bit to try to get the output shaft to lean over. It's riding on the reverse idler, but I don't want it just settling down because I want that thing centered, and it's not quite centered, so I don't know if I can get it in there without putting the camera down. And then after I get that on, I got to do the bearing on the other side. So, see if I can get that started. And this is probably going to be I have to put the camera down. Now that blocking ring, it's got the 3 keyways in there, so that has to line up. So somewhere about like that. I don't know if you can see in there or not, because I can't see anything. Let me see if I can get it started. There, fast forwarded. It's in all the way. Bearings seated. That's in there. My blocking rings are in. Spacing looks good. Now I got to do this bearing on the outside. Now this bearing, it fits very snugly. So it's kind of stops right there. That's as far as I can get it. It's right here. So the last bearing I had to heat up with my heat gun, so I'm going to do the same. I'm worried because I tried last time after I slid it on. When I slid this bearing on there, it's still on the shaft. It's a piece of cake. I probably heated it up too much. 200 was too high, but I could not get it in the case then because the outer ring expanded a little bit too, the race. So it's like a catch-22, you know. It's big enough to fit over the shaft, but then too big to fit through the case, because without the shaft in there, this thing just barely fits in. I don't want to have to beat it in, but if I have to, I'll just be gentle with it. But whatever, let's just try it. All right, that wasn't easy. I tipped my case out on end so that it would hold the input shaft in. I have it sitting in that little space. Of course, the first time I tipped it over, I wasn't holding on to the input shaft, so it slid out and the needle bearings fell out. So I had to put it back in. So anyway, tipped it over, and it was a lot easier to center the output shaft when I was dropping the bearing on there. I heated it up to about 200 degrees. It was tough getting it on, but it's on there. So I put my snap ring here. I just gotta get the other ring on here. The bearing has to pull out just a little bit with that shaft. I'll get that on. Then I can put in my new countershaft pin in there. Okay, the countershaft pin, it's not quite all the way in yet. I left it out a little bit so that I can seal right here in the bore, because nothing covers this. This is open to your bell housing, so it definitely got to be sealed. So this was recommended for sealing around there. Permatex anaerobic gasket maker. I'm also going to use this around the plug here. This covers the 3/4 shift rail. Here's the plug I have. It's pretty soft metal. It's not lead, but it might be lead. It's pretty soft and kind of heavy. When I pulled it out of the other case and tried to fit in here, it was very loose and sloppy. So I peened it flat with a mallet so that it sticks in there. I don't want it to fall out by itself. And then I'll just put some sealer underneath of it and then over top of it, so that won't leak, because that's very important. Also, I don't know if you remember, my shift arms were very sloppy on there. So I took a punch and peened that out a little bit on both sides, and now they fit pretty snug on there. So what was happening before was, it's on there snug. I gotta just tap it on. What was happening, since there was so much play in it, it worked the nut loose, and this thing was flopping around, so not good. Also did the same thing with the 3/4 shift lever. That's a 2108. So these things run about, fits nice and snug on there now. These things run about $30 on eBay a piece. So I was like, whoa, I'm just gonna try to fix the one I got. And if it does fail eventually, then I can just buy one then, but I'm not doing it now. All right. Okay, I've got the countershaft pin in, and I sealed it with a gasket maker, whatever it's called. I had to make sure I didn't drive it too far, because I wanted to make sure this is flush, because this flange, I'm not quite sure if it touches it or not. I'm not going to put it on yet, but it might just barely cover it to keep it from sliding over. I don't know, but I didn't want it to stick out. And then when it's done, I'll shave. I'll use a razor blade and shave off anything that's overlapping underneath here. Same with this one. I'm not sure if this actually covers it a little bit. I don't remember it covering it at all. So I put a very small bead in there. It's kind of like a gel. It's kind of clear. And here's the little plug that goes in there. It's I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's tapered on the edges. So let's just see what happens. See what I did. Good job of peening it over. Okay, I think I did good. It's snug right now, and it's not quite flush. So when I drive it in there, it should hold itself in, and then I'll put some more sealer on the outside of it, and then shave it smooth when it's dry. Okay, here's my bearing retainer. I put a very thin coat of that anaerobic gasket maker on there with the paper gasket, and I coated both sides of the gasket. When this goes on, that oil hole, that notch, that's where the oil drains out. It has to go on the bottom, because this little hole right here, that goes back for the oil return. So oil's going to seep through the bearings and then go back out through there. All these bolt holes also go through to the case, so they need thread sealer on there so it doesn't leak. So you'll see when it's facing down, the writing's upside down. So a little counterintuitive if you weren't looking at the back side of it. And there we go. It's snug on my bearing. Okay. Okay, I'm working on the tail shaft, getting that ready to install it on my new case with my old gears, new synchro blocker rings, new bearings, new gaskets, new O-rings, anything new but the gears. So I got the tail shaft seal off. This goes around the yoke on the drive shaft. This has a guess it's just a dust seal on it. The real seal's on the inside right there. One that's got those little lines on it. And here's my new one. Does not have that dust seal on there, but I'm pretty sure it's still going to work. So I was able to knock that out. It just drops in there, and you can see it's gouged up for over the years of other people taking one out. I don't know why they would gouge down there trying to pry it, I guess. So I got to get this bearing out of there, or a bushing bearing, I don't know. Here's my new one. If that means anything. It's got some oil grooves in there. The other one that's in there doesn't seem to have that, so I'll have to see. I'm guessing the oil groove, this is the bottom here, so the oil groove will go down to that. Not really sure. There's no reason for it to be anywhere else because there's no place for oil to go in that oil hole. So, but I use this return oil slot to drive this bushing out because I couldn't drive it from the bottom out. I don't have anything that long to drive it out, so it's just tapping it out and it's working. And I'll tap in the new one without meshing up the edges. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet. Maybe I can use the old bushing to tap it in there. Maybe that'll work. We'll have to try that out. All right, I had this super large socket. I think this was to get off the crank bolt on my Volkswagen Beetle. So still coming in handy after all these years. And I just put that over there and just tapped it down. Didn't have to tap too hard, and it's flush. So I think I'm good. There's a new seal. Interesting, I don't know why, but these new seals, I guess they're just so cheap. They don't even put a stamping or anything on there. I can't find any marking. So I don't know how they tell them apart if you have a bunch of them together. Trial and error? I don't know. So I want to paint this just because it used to look nice, but that was mainly just grease and oil on the outside. So you can see the paint's coming off here. I don't have any shiny black paint. It would look nice, but I do have some Ford blue. So I guess Ford blue it's going to be. So I use some degreaser on here, like purple, purple degreaser stuff you find at the automotive place. Got all that off, and then I sprayed it with some brake clean and scrubbed it with a wire brush. You got to do a little section at a time because the brake clean dries really fast, and all that old paint came off. It's looking pretty good. So here's all the paint just kind of dries up into feels like little pieces of rubber. So I'll keep working on it, cleaning off, and then I'll coat it with some primer and then coat it with that Ford blue right there. Okay, I've got my my fancy new blue paint job on there. Put primer on first, and it left a mess everywhere getting all that old paint and grease off of there. So got the new bushing in there, my new seal, also run a thin bead of grease on there, and I've seen a bunch of people recommend when you're placing this on that you should use the drive shaft yoke on here to center it before you tighten it down. But I placed it down and it sits really snug around this bearing right here. This bearing sticks up. If you look on the bottom, you can see how it's machined in there very nicely. So the bearing sits here, and then that retaining ring sits there. So it sits very snug. There's no play at all side to side. You can rotate it, but that doesn't change the centering. So I'm not going to bother taking my yoke off the drive shaft. And I have two different gaskets. So this is like the standard gasket. Very flimsy, but it does fit nice on here because it's the same size as the bearing. So it's easy to center it, but I don't really like it too much because it's like the thinnest kind of paper. This is a gasket that came with the replacement case that I got, and it's got this nice bead on both sides That should help seal it. So I'm going to use that one. And I'm also going to, again, use my thread sealer on the 5 bolts because you can see all these bolts come through. So definitely need to seal those. Okay, I've got the tail shaft on there, tail shaft housing. I got the bolts just sitting in there right now. They look pretty gnarly. And putting in the last one, I got my thread sealer on there. So I'm gonna have to fix these bolts. I didn't want to paint them beforehand because then when you tighten them down, it ends up chipping the paint off. So I'll just do what I did before, touching up the engine block and spray some paint in a little cup and then just use a paintbrush and fix it up nice. All right. Here's my cover, my top cover for my top loader. There's several layers of paint on there. It was black on top of this gray. The black came off easy. It might have just been grease, but the gray is also coming off because it's got some corrosion underneath of it. But it's kind of mangled up. So I'm gonna see if I can straighten that out. I mean, it's still pretty flat on the bottom, so I don't know if I can fix this up. It's probably just for aesthetics, but I don't want to put something that looks like that back on this beautiful thing over here. So anyway, let's see what I can do. So I just finished putting a coat of primer on there. I tried straightening out the edges as best I could. So it looks a lot better. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's ever going to see it again unless they take the transmission out. And I'll also spend some time with a straight edge on the bottom, making sure that it was pretty flush and tapping it with a hammer so that the surface is pretty flush. So next is the Ford blue, so it matches the tranny. Okay, so the transmission is completely assembled. I painted my top cover, put that on there, sealed it with just a little bit of that anaerobic thread maker, whatever it's called, gasket maker, blah, blah, blah.